was looking for. Yeah.
Good idea, that's right. Hello, I'm Pat Hennessy, the Commissioner General here at the Ireland Pavilion, and I'm delighted to welcome you all, both those here in person and those watching online, to this event looking at the Metaverse. We've been really pleased throughout the Sustainable Development Goals and the relationship which they have obviously to this debate, and we're delighted to carry on that conversation today here at the Pavilion. We're joined by Karl and Christopher, who will be leading a conversation that I think will drive this debate forward. So just on behalf of everybody here at the Ireland Pavilion, delighted to have you here and delighted to be working with this team again on these important topics. Thank you very much.
I'll come as a second introduction. Thank you very much for letting us borrow your pavilion, the beautiful green pavilion, and for giving us a space where we can discuss this. I think today's setup is a really interesting one. We talk about the Metaverse quite a lot, but sustainability is not often part of that discussion, at least from my perspective. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Anne-Marie, and I have the Umbrella Institute, which is a sustainability and CSR advisory here in the UAE. And we try and help companies understand what sustainability is on a human and environmental aspect, and create profitability. So many of the companies that we work with are interested in the Metaverse, right? And of course to create profit, but we need still to balance that over time and make sure that this is something that is balanced. So today I have a question, because I'm the devil on your shoulder and he's the angel, I believe. And I'll be asking like critical questions after, but we'd love to hear what you tell us about the business.
Sure.
And I think that we can all learn, no matter how, like there's so much to know about the business, so we should just continue to keep asking. But what we also have is, like Pat mentioned, is we have the UN, the cities we need now. So this is really part of a bigger topic about what is it we're creating, the societies that we are building, and what is part of that. So welcome today. I have a lot of numbers and facts and figures here, but I'm sure you have the same I'll ask you one. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Right. Kick it off.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Paul. I think for me, sort of tying the whole metaverse, and that I use that term very lightly because we're talking about a much bigger scale. I think I look at examples like the Ottoman Empire, in the 1400s with the advent of the printing press. And as the story goes, the Sultan actually banned printing of text in Arabic because at the time we had 90,000 employees, scholars and artists that were doing handwritten works. So they actually banned the printing press because they were scared that it was going to cost jobs in the market. And that's sort of, to me, that's sort of where the tie-in comes in with, are we facing the same type of problem where people are not taking what's happening in the metaverse seriously enough, and are people and economies going to be left behind?
So I think the best way to look at it is that's a good analogy, because ultimately it's, do you board, a lot of people say, do you board the train versus leaving the station? I use this analogy, board the spaceship because it's heading out to other planets. So the speed of change that's happening right now, the metaverse is just an add-on to that speed of change. And I think it's a nice way to sort of delve into what is possible. And I think what is possible is a culmination of what we're seeing around digitalization of economies, of industry, and this whole new world around Web 3.0, which are all new terms that most people are not really familiar with. And so literacy is going to be the key behind all this. Yeah. But that's where...
I think just talking about literacy, I think, can you give us a general idea of where you see what the metaverse actually is and how that ties into our society now?
Sure, I mean, so think the physical world that we're all living in and those experiences that we're going through today, translate that into a digital experience. And that's really what it's all about at the moment. And when I say at the moment, it's because it's being created as we speak. So, you know, the best way to think about it is every kind of experience you may currently go through, whether it's in the gaming world or whether it's in attending an event or a concert or whether it's even owning an asset, think of a digital representation and an experience version of that allows you to engage. So yes, obviously VR and concepts around AR are being applied. You know, all these areas around experiences of remote attendance, whether it's remote working, for example, or whether it's remote experiences through various type of services. I mean, as an example, you had in the UAE, the Ministry of Health opening up a customer service centre in the Metaverse, as an example. So all of those are touch points which are physically already happening in the physical world, but they are being replicated in that world. But then there's another layer above these other layers that I've just mentioned, which is, well, how and what shape is this going to potentially look like? And the easiest way to think about it is look at your kids and look at the young generation and think about what is it that they're engaged with today, other than the fact that they're carrying iPads. What they're really doing is they're playing games. They're playing these interesting games called Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite. And they're buying outfits for those avatars that they currently have to represent them in these games. Right? And so that generation is the online generation born into this world, which is the world of the internet, Web 2.0 / Web 3.0 as we see it. If that's already happening there, and they're going to enter the workforce at some point in time, then the metaverse is just going to be one angle of us experiencing various other elements of what I've just described in a more immersive environment. So, you know, I get credit card transactions done on my card that, you know, my son went and bought a skin for one of his Roblox games, and you know, that's already happening, right? But the currency of use for that, for example, is my current card and a fiat currency. In this world, in the gaming world that's going to be coming through, which is this play to earn worlds, you're using digital currencies to buy avatars or skins, and then you're potentially using them to lease out to players who will then utilize that to play these games and earn an income. The difference between this world and the current or previous world of gaming is they were centralized games in a central environment where you were not earning any physical income for participation. In this world you are. And so now you start to talk about other things. Now you start to say, oh, okay, there is a potential here for economic equalization to take place. And that economic equalization is providing opportunities for a different form of income generation. And then all the creativity goes behind that. And that's just one small component that I'm talking about in relation to the metaverse. But then you apply that to the industries at large. So if you think of what's happened over the last 2 or 3 months, I'm not sure if you've all kept up to date because there's so many changes, so many acquisitions going on. But I'll start with a couple of headline acquisitions. So most recent, then I'll go backwards. So Red Bull last week announced that they are creating a Red Bull Metaverse. They want to showcase all their experiences in this world that they currently have. They've got a whole bunch of immersive content, you know, video content and various other content they've got, and they want to start showcasing it in this world. And various aspects behind it, they've actually submitted a patent for that. McDonald's, and these are 2 food and beverage firms, have also submitted a patent for also having representation there. So that's from a food and beverage side. Go back further, you've got banks, you know, they're opening up those experiences for interaction with banks in the metaverse. HSBC has done recently, they bought a digital piece of land, I think it was the Sandbox in that metaverse, and their intent is to also showcase. And then you go further back, and you start to see what's happening in one of the metaverses called Decentraland, where a lot of obviously celebrities and brands are now buying digital land, setting up stores. You know, Nike, I think, is one of those, and a few others. So, you know, there is a real sense of movement that's starting to take shape. You know, and I've had some discussions recently, even this last week, around, well, are all the brands going to be represented there? Well, I would suggest that if you're physically present in the physical world and wanting to have a brand, I guess, available through storefronts, then you have to have a participation in this world. And if you start to think about where we've gone with the internet, and this is probably the best analogy I can use. You know, there is generations, and I'm looking around the room, where there's a generation who was born without the internet. You know, we're 1.0. There's one. I'm sure there's more than one here. We were born without the internet. And so, you know, Web 1.0 was when Netscape launched back in the 90s. That was just us accessing, so it was reading content that was provided to us. Fast track to the social internet world, which is, well, hang on, we can not only read these websites and get information, we're now also able to offer us some information, and in most cases, we offer our data free of charge to a lot of these social companies, whether it's Facebook, whether it's others. And so, you know, that's the Web 2.0 world that we've been living in. Right? Throw on top of that now a really exciting opportunity, which is not just to read and write, but to also own your own content and data. And so this world is, I guess, really exciting because you can create and you can own that, and you can shape where it can go. Now, there's many other pillars behind making that a reality, because obviously big tech wants to come in because they control the Web 2.0 world. But at the same time, you do need the rails. You do need the infrastructure in place to make it happen. And so there are many other attributes you've got to start thinking about, which is, you know, policy, and we'll talk about that, I guess, at some point here. But that's really what it is, and it's here. And whether we want to call it, you know, metaverse or multiverse, you know, it's going to happen. And I think the sooner we all become a little bit more agile and literate in this world, the better we can help shape it in the right direction.
I think that sort of ties in with my next sort of question is, you talk about these large companies that are all coming in and trying to have structure in them. How do we prevent the same mistakes we made in Web 2.0? How do we actually make access for the general public, not just for large infrastructure companies to control and mandate how those structures are done?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a tough proposition because it's like saying, you know, there's a developer who's come aboard on the land industry, and then how do you control the master plan that's happening, right? So typically that will happen because they've got to submit a master plan that's got to be agreed to with, you know, the neighbours in the street, the council, and the various government authorities. The same, I think, needs to sort of somehow play a role in terms of very early, public-private partnership participation in shaping policy and recommendation for policy adoption, which is more uniform across not just a country or a city, but also cross-border. And I think it's the same that currently applies. It's hard to sort of understand where this could go because there are so many actors in this space who are claiming that their metaverse is one to participate in. But you can do it. I mean, ultimately, you can protect the consumer rights in the same way that we've done it in the current physical economy. Now, we've missed the boat in terms of data to an extent. We're now trying to play catch up. You know, the GDPR situation in the EU, you know, protecting your own data and access to your data. I think that's important. We can apply a similar approach. I've chaired, just in the last couple of months here in Dubai, we've brought together the key government policy shapers and also industry, and all the names that we're talking about and others. together in forums to identify what are the challenges around policy that need to be thought about. And there are issues right now where you've seen, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with this, but there's been claims of harassment in the metaverse, and not physical, but it's the effect of if harassment's taking place in the metaverse and someone felt violated, then there needs to be a policy jurisdictional carryover and accountability for that. So,
where are we with that type of development? I mean,
yeah.
As I see it at the moment, you've got countries like China that are kind of leading the way in policy and structure for this tech development that we're going through. But where is Europe and the Americas? And more importantly, sort of where does that tie in for the developing world? How do those poorer countries that don't have the access actually get into that flow and actually participate in it without sort of one or two big countries making those decisions for us?
Yeah, look, again, great question. It's more about who is currently shaping and defining areas around the metaverse which are growing at speed. In the gaming world, that's exploding. And it's exploding in the emerging markets as much and as quickly as it's in the developed markets. So if I had to say, is the West or is China or who's leading in this space, we haven't really got to the point of there is an end. We're just at the beginning of the launch pad. And so the quicker we can get on board in various regions which have influence and share that in terms of the approach with every country out there who has players in those regions who are creating them, the faster and quicker things will move. So we've started that here. As I said, I've chaired policy workshops where we identified the problems that we need to be addressing in Web 3.0 from a policy perspective. And now we've actually come up with recommendations. And those recommendations are part of a report that the Capital Club that we're bringing together. And that'll go further on. So the point is, that probably needs to happen and shared obviously publicly. We've actually shared our reports online. And I think that's the key. It's got to be openly shared. And there's a lot of white papers out there in terms of the tech concepts. So whether it's a white paper for a crypto project or for any other Web 3.0 project, they're openly shared, these white papers, right? The same things apply from a policy recommendation perspective in a more broader sense. And having that as a working platform that we can get alignment on. We've done it with tax already. If you think of the global applications of a multinational tax regime, we could do it. Yeah.
Then obviously, if you look at the general Joe or Jane that's in the public, sort of 32-year-old female working in an office, got a normal standard job, how do we get those people to actually be involved in the metaverse and benefit from the metaverse so that it's a total society?
Look, I think accessibility is the key, right, with all of this. So, we've seen through the pandemic the issue of, central business district shutdowns, right? And so not having access, physical access to get to work. Those companies that pivoted really quickly to this digital offering and having multi-engagements and collaboration through those streams continue to operate and innovate really. And even in the e-com world, it accelerated. So, if I am an average middle-aged worker that's currently considering how do I participate, how do I maintain engagement? Well, ultimately you're already going through this transition.
Yeah.
So as you're going through this transition, it's really important to understand and learn about the impact that's coming. And I think once you understand the impact that's coming, whether it's through, a lot of people ask me this question, well, what about AI? It's going to take over. Well, you've got to break it down, right? There is various elements of AI which are going to play a really efficient role for us. Doesn't mean it's going to wipe out your job, but it may be transitioning into something quite more interesting. But at the same time, you can become much more efficient in how you approach your career and how you approach your business. And so I'm seeing it already. I mean, I believe that eventually at some point, portfolio careers will become a norm, where you would probably carry multiple roles with multiple companies versus one single employer. And that's because of the virtue of being able to remotely work. And I think the metaverse will offer concepts and opportunities. As an example, if you look at the health sector, purely with health and remote health, there's a strong value proposition towards remote health within applications via a metaverse approach. And you know, not just in terms of care, but you know, ongoing care, mental health. I mean, we look at the challenges we've had with COVID. We're going at the back of it now, and we're coming out with these issues around, you know, people being isolated for extended periods of time, and the challenges behind mental health. So technically, you can address that, but you can also offer opportunities for services to provide a more, you know, long-term medial care. And I'm seeing that already with big tech integrators who are looking to help, you know, in that sector, and that's just one application.
So, when we're looking at all of this and trying to predict how the world of work will actually look for most people, how do you see those jobs changing? How do you see the average job earner being able to integrate into that world? How do we change that world for them? Is it purely just an education thing, or do we need to develop more educational areas?
Look, education is the key, but the format of how you absorb that information and the way that you're going to be able to fast track that learning process is more important. So I'm involved in one metaverse project right now, which is around immersive learning in the metaverse. And it's immersive learning of Web 3.0 blockchain, but everything else in between. And it can be applied to any form of industry transformation that's happening. Because if you've got to think of universities up to today have been more inclined to have a physical presence, but there's also a structured process for that, usually upwards of 3 to 4 years, if you're doing a marketing or a finance degree or whatever it may be, right? And that's specialised. But you would argue that the pace of change that's happening, and I would call it almost like short format type of learning, is becoming more the norm as well. Because in this tech world that we're living in, most of it is absorbed through video online. But if you could take it to the next level and say, well, hang on, it's great, I've watched a whole bunch of content, you know, and it's streamed to me by video, or whether it's Coursera online, or whether it's, you know, a Harvard course online. Still, you know, there's that missing feeling, but there are ways to do it now through an immersive environment, where you could be sitting there and in a course, and you could be the CEO, you could be an Elon Musk sitting there, but your avatar is there. And so the person next to you wouldn't know that you're Elon Musk, for example, or wouldn't know you're a board director of, you know, a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company. And so your feeling of pseudo-anonymity gives you a feeling, okay, now I'm going to start to learn more. Because you've got to remember, you need boards to be as agile, as educated as, you know, the workforce itself. Because if they're not in tune, then the pace of adaptation towards this new economy, and I do say it's a digital economy, transition we're going through, will not be fast enough to survive. So literacy as an individual comes to change. You know, how do you approach change as an individual? So you've got to think about that, you know, much more importantly at the outset. But then the tools and ways of engagement are happening now. And so we're going to be showcasing one of these concepts at the Capital Club next week, for example. But I think if you have a change mindset, you've got two ways of approaching it. You can expect change, and it's happening, but do you embrace it? And they're two different things. And I speak a lot about this concept of, you know, having a DNA, of, you know, an innovation-led DNA, but what does that mean? Well, we're human beings at the end of the day, we solve problems. The difference between us and, I guess, the animal kingdom is that we wake up every day looking to solve a problem, whether it's my toothpaste that's not there in the morning, I need to order it online, whatever it may be, getting to work in a ride share versus public transport or whatever. So we're always solving problems, and we get to our jobs and we're constantly solving a problem through the day. So the innovation DNA needs to be at the forefront of all this. And I think when you approach it in this way, things move, and then you start to learn much more rapidly. And they all got to go in hand in hand. You know? And I'll give you an example, just even with a personal example with my dad. You know, he's in his mid-80s. It wasn't until 2 years ago that he actually got a mobile phone. He'd never used a phone in his life. In fact, I don't think he ever used even the touchpad phones on a landline. But he got a gift, and he's gone from mainstream information through broadcast TV, free-to-air TV, to getting all of his information now online. He searches his own content, he does that. But he also interacts via WhatsApp and messaging. He's up to speed, he's up to date, he's highly engaged. And that's, when you think of that generation, they've onboarded very quickly. Now, what does that mean? That means that we need to look at it both ways. It's not just the young generation teaching us, we need to also think about, and there's a lot of experiences that he's gone through in life which can be shared, right?
But I think from a safety point of view, we've given our data away completely for free. How does that change when we move to this new digital technology of the metaverse? How do we protect that data, and how is it different from what we've got with the standard internet that we have these days?
Well, the data in its raw form is there. It's as is. It hasn't changed in terms of its raw form. What are you giving up, and to whom, and how? So we didn't really understand the value of that data until we started getting all these adverts coming into our lives constantly, relentlessly. In some case, imaginatively. Through listening devices that just come in, and you're having conversations and suddenly you get this email saying, "Hey, I was having a conversation about a holiday to Baku 5 minutes ago, and then I come to my desk and I got an email, and a special offer to go to Baku." I'm like, well, how'd that happen? So, we don't read the terms and conditions of our signing on of these apps. We haven't done a good enough job to summarize that into something which is easy to understand. And I think the experience of that, and this, by the way, something that I think can fast track what you understand in terms of control. It's not just cookies, it's not just signing off on cookies, it's what's the long-term ownership, what I'm signing up for you. And so having 50 pages of terms and conditions which nobody reads, even the lawyers don't read after they've issued them, into maybe a 2-minute short format video that highlights all of the key things, that becomes much more palatable. Now I know what I'm in for. And mandating that aspect to begin with. Now, in terms of what am I giving up, in the metaverse and Web 3.0, governance can be done one of two ways. There's this concept called DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. So communities can technically, if it's issued by a metaverse project, can technically govern what happens continuously with that project. Now that governance model is the community allows deciding, right? It flips it on its head in terms of the direction of these organisations.
But in that, how do we ensure that the poorer societies actually get that access?
Yeah. So this is the challenge again. It goes back to, you've got to start with infrastructure, right? Ultimately, if you don't have connectivity, those poorer economies out there, which don't have the relevant infrastructure to fast track, need to be brought up to speed. Because if I think of the global population as we speak, there's 8 billion people on Earth. 4 billion people are online. Of the 4 billion, I would argue less than 1% is engaged in this discussion you and I are talking about on the metaverse. Which means there's another 4 billion to come online who are not currently connected to the internet, which is these challenging, I guess, countries which are not yet raising the infrastructure standard to get there. So you've got to start with infrastructure. Now, beyond that is, as I said earlier, it's around literacy. And so they will make decisions much the same way as in Africa, where they skipped landline connectivity and went straight to mobile. And the same thing will apply here. But also what will apply is financial inclusion will change. So economic, as I was saying earlier, economic equalisation will start to take place, because anyone here familiar with Axie Infinity, just as a note, it's a Metaverse game, a play-to-earn Metaverse game. Okay, so during the lockdown, Axie Infinity as a Metaverse game exploded in use. You had a lot of people living in parts of the world, subcontinent Asia and other parts of the world, who were not earning income. They couldn't travel, they couldn't get out and about. The young generation got onto Axie Infinity and started playing the Axie Infinity game. It's amazing what was going on. So the younger population were becoming the primary breadwinners in an online gaming way to feed their families. They're earning incomes of whatever through these NFT drops that were taking place. And so it's the same opportunity that they were available as someone in the US or someone in the UK or in Australia. But what's interesting is they were feeding their families and also bringing that speed. So this is now becoming a very big area of focus in these economies. So those generations are now used to this. Now, what does that mean? It means, in the old world we say, well, hang on, they're underage. I mean, they should be at school, absolutely. But if you're playing these games at home under the supervision of your family, and technically you're enjoying it, and you're earning income, and that's a quite interesting balance there. And so, as I said earlier, if you look at the demographics of that 8 billion, and you look at the age groups, you could argue that probably leadership in these sort of space may come out of these emerging markets. And I think, that'll naturally take its place. I know of one project which is out there providing connectivity in Africa, through helium balloons and sustainable energy through, and we'll get into sustainable at some point, through these batteries and these remote parts of Africa. And the idea is Wi-Fi across 70 kilometres. But the point is, there is a engage to earn model. The more you use the Wi-Fi connectivity, you're actually earning tokens behind that, which now changes the mechanism. Well, hang on, that data you were talking about, which I'm giving up, if I'm participating in that infrastructure, which is adding value to the provider, why not be rewarded through tokenomics, which then allows me to exchange that value in the way that I want to exchange it. There is a firm out of Australia called Internet Energy Network, IOEN, which I advise. And what's interesting with them is that they've also come up with this smart grid tokenization model. And that model is, if you look at energy grids today, they are today there is a lot of electricity in our grids. There's no lack of supply of energy, right? And we're talking about carbon offset and carbon emissions, but that needs to be dissipated somewhere. Well, they've created this protocol which allows that interface between your home devices, big ticket IoT devices, fridges, washers, dryers, to then have an interface to the smart grid, and the grid itself can obviously offset that dissipation of power through to those devices, and you get rewarded through tokens. And then those tokens allow you to exchange that value, maybe to pay off your bill, maybe to pay someone else's bill over on the grid, or offshore, potentially, in some of these countries that don't currently have the means to pay for those bills, right? So there is an exchange of value mechanism that tokenomics can bring into the equation. And their concept is really like the energy of the Metaverse. Another example, right? So there's many ways we can shape and form how this could apply. Localization is the key, but there's no reason why these emerging markets can't lead.
Are there, on the subject of sustainability, we all sort of see, okay, well, you can have virtual meetings and therefore your carbon footprint when you're traveling is lower. But what are the other parts of sustainability that the metaverse can contribute towards?
I mean, it's creativity is really has no limit. Travel obviously has been impacted massively. We know that, right? So, but I would look at it from this angle. If I look at sport and I look at entertainment, and I look at most major sports over the last 2 years, only up until recently, weren't allowed to have full capacity stadiums. Right? So if I start to think of a stadium operator and a sports club, and I start thinking of even event management, why not have a virtualized stadium in the metaverse, which allows me to participate anywhere in the world? I'm a rugby follower. My favourite team is Sydney. I can't physically. Yeah, that's okay. I follow the Canterbury Bankstown rugby league team, so put it out there. But here's the interesting thing: is that I can't physically go there. And for the last 2 years, obviously, we had those issues of travelling because of border closures and everything else. Until recently, Australia's opened up. So now, if I want to attend that, and I've got a seat there virtually, and I'm sitting down now, and I've got my friends and family in Oz attending the same event, the same sports event. But they're not only just watching it together in an immersive environment, feeling like I'm there, but if my favourite player scores a try, I get the opportunity to buy that jersey. And it could be a digital representation of that jersey because he scored 5 tries in that game, so it's a very unique NFT, which we haven't spoken about. Non-fungible token, so that's a thing there. But then that itself becomes a memorabilia for me. And I get a physical one shipped to me in my location. And I'm enjoying this event with 20 million other followers. I'm not sure Canterbury has 20 million followers, but let's just say they do. But the point is that I didn't travel. Physically, I didn't get out of, I didn't leave home. Obviously, yes, I'm using the cloud services, I'm using the home internet connection, which you could argue, yes, there are energy footprints behind that. But if you start to weigh up potentially 20 million attendees to watch this game, and I'm being rewarded for that, and then I'm exchanging the value of what I'm doing, I think there's a big benefit there. And so that's one example in sports and entertainment. We saw, I think, with one live event, I think the Travis Scott live event in Fortnite was hosted. There was 20 million attendees for that, and that's mind-boggling, because if you start to think about the impact, technically we don't need to travel as much, true, but you're innovating now in sport, and so now you start to think of what's the true value of an asset, a real estate asset. What's the true value of a sports club? Is it that I just need to sign up Ronaldo and I'm going to get 100 million followers? Maybe not. Maybe there's another way of doing it. Right? So there's all these, and you're bringing up those experiences. So now the challenge is, what kind of experiences are you going to get there? And you can innovate around it, whether it's merchant services, whether it's, as I mentioned, even with memorabilia. But beyond any of that, I mean, there's obviously art. I mean, we're going to showcase again a virtual Metaverse art museum. One of our, Biennale, that's the entity that's going to be doing it next week, and they've taken this concept of going through an art museum with digital artwork, old Michelangelo and others, and more recent, and you're navigating, obviously using VR, but you're doing it with friends and people of common interests from around the world. You're meeting people. And so you can buy that artwork as well, a digital replica of it, potentially. And then you can navigate through various worlds of history of art without having to physically go overseas or wherever. But the point is, you'll probably end up still doing that at some point. But you've now got a really clear understanding and experience of what that is. And it's an immersive learning environment.
Sorry, I have so many comments,
Yes,
and I hope you also have positive things.
Please.
So we talk about traveling, for instance. I'll just give you a little bit of insight, and maybe it's taken out of context. But data centers are responsible for 2% of the global GHG as of 2015. So it's risen since then, which is the same as the overall aviation industry, okay? Then another one that connects to this very clearly is that, one second. This is a finding from University of Bristol. It found that if just 30% of the gamers using 720p or 1080p devices where they transfer it to the cloud, if they go, like if the people who now currently use 720 or 1080, if they transition to sending it all to the cloud, this will increase the carbon with 30%. While if 90% of these gamers put it on the cloud, which the Metaverse is, as far as I understand, then it will increase the gamers' overall carbon emissions by 112%. This means that if you take those 2% that is currently the same as the aviation industry, it will double, right? So we've doubled the aviation industry for something that's still fun. It's not a need to. We survive without the Metaverse. We'll also survive after the Metaverse. But we are creating a lot of emissions from fun.
Totally agree. Look, I mean, that's today. That's as it is today with the current technology limitations that we have, right? So innovation will lead to change here. And the reason is we now have this concerted effort globally, wanting to reduce or wanting to address the challenges that we have around carbon emissions and maintaining, a limitation on that. So big tech, small tech will have to adjust in some way. Now, what I would say though, and I totally agree with you, is that you start with the underlying technology that you're building these gaming platforms on, and on the blockchain, there is many different forms of blockchain technology you can build on. Some are more efficient than others, right? And the tokenomics modeling behind that can be more efficient. I'm not going to go into the technical nature of that, but the concepts behind it, the proof of work, proof of stake, versus a layer one technology, whether it's a polygon or a non. I mean, there's different form factors of layer one technology which can have an impact. It doesn't have a total impact, but it has an impact. In terms of data centers are here to stay, because the reality is we cannot operate with the current connected world that we have in Web 2.0 without the use of data centers. However, there are the nanotechnology is starting to evolve, and all of the efficiencies around processing, the speed of technology around the changes that are happening there, at some point will also help in this angle of processing. I think regardless, we need to sort of have a bigger play in terms of how we're also generating energy and how are we able to sustain that in a localized environment. So whether it's higher use of batteries or not, you can argue in terms of the
Efficiency.
whether the efficiency of batteries or, but you're absolutely right. We have to do
But we're
this.
spending a lot of energy on decarbonizing big industries, and then we take that effort that we've decarbonized and let's go and buy a VR headset and go and have fun, right? And that doesn't add up to like long-term sustainability where we are more than 8 billion people.
Yeah, that's a macro. Yeah, it's certainly a macro view. Yeah, sorry.
I think there's also a point that we've got to look at Metaverse, Multiverse, as more than just a gaming platform, where we've got to look at the educational abilities of it and the ability to conference with people across the world and share ideas and develop education. If it does become just a concern, that's my biggest concern with large companies, is then it just becomes another consumer product and they just pump us with more and more NFTs and things that we need to buy. And preventing that from happening, I think, is very, very important, that the Metaverse does actually have value and not just a gaming platform and consumerism.
No, totally. And again, it's exchange of value is the area you've got to think about. What is the value that's been created in that segment, whatever it may be? And I gave you the one example around energy smart grids, but potentially the exchange of value behind that means you're not wasting the the energy that's already there, that's been created through the current technology we're using, whether you're using current hydroelectric power or solar, whatever. There's an excess supply that's coming in. But
Sorry, just on that point. So the energy efficiency, just in the US, for example, they actually waste about 45% of all energy that's produced because we don't have grid structure. So if the metaverse can produce better ways of managing that, then yes, there can be that offset for the issue that they're creating.
Yeah, totally.
Any other questions?
Lots.
Keep
No,
going.
I want to talk about that, because I think it's, on one hand, the metaverse and everything that's related or based on blockchain technology is evolving on technologies that are evolving really fast, and energy technology maturity is at a very high level. Like renewable energy is potentially doubling every year. I don't know exactly the numbers. And so I think that there is an offset there that is compensating and enabling these technologies to emerge as well. And of course, then you have blockchain that connects you to specific power grid sources that are clean and volatile. You can build these technologies associated with those. Then, if you go into mixed reality, and I'm looking at the consumerism, so I work for Amazon, so it's all about consumerism, right? But if you go into mixed realities, is outside of the metaverse and going into the field and everything, we are in Dubai, there's no other place that I've ever seen where consumerism happens than here. But you don't need to buy those physical assets anymore. If you have I think Magic Leap now with these like mixed reality goggles, and you can use your fashion designer clothes if you want, but they are digital assets. So there's not all the supply chain that we don't know nothing about, by the way. There's not all the supply chain problems that we have in terms of manufacturing that good, transporting it, going twice around the world before it arrives to your home. So whatever energy is used to create some of those assets is 10 times better than consuming the old asset that has this inefficient supply chain source. So I think there's more benefits than bad things coming in. Of course, now if you look at only aviation, but aviation, is it passenger aviation or is supply chain aviation? It's completely different sectors and impacts. And talking about, and so I think we need to weigh it across different sectors that impact our life, and not just on the energy consumed by the gamer that is online because the spends 2 more hours and he has like a super high feed of data coming in. But I think we need to see it holistically and not fall into the trap of comparing it with only one stream, which is very easy because our knowledge is there.
No, it's really important. I think addressing the whole supply chain from A to Z is really important. And it's interesting you were talking about whether you're buying a physical thing or just to travel around. I mean, my daughter, for example, on her birthday last year, she said to me, "Dad, don't get me any clothing or anything. Just I want to dress up the skins on my avatar." So what? Which game is this? It was Roblox. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's all you want. But I mean, there is an unmeasured element I think to this, which we have to get better at, because I think ultimately the way we're measuring this digital economy, we're only scratching the surface of how we should be gathering that intelligence behind comparison of offsets, but also more importantly is value and value exchange, because we have to measure it up on both sides, and it has to come towards, again, a common goal. The common goal is, certainly from a sustainability angle, is to maintain global climate temperatures and the global warming aspect, right? So we need to have an alignment there at some point through this whole process. So the best way to do that with a human being is to incentivize them to change behaviour and to do other things personally, firstly, and then corporate and everything else that goes with it. I know Pedro's sort of a specialist in that area on our side, but having seen that, there is a way of marrying the two together using the metaverse as a tool, to do the topic today, to help in that way. Elements of those tools are there at those grassroots layer. Token economics is really, I think, the secret sauce. And then you can peel away at the various technology efficiencies that should be applied. And maybe certain industries need to make standards approach to the way that they apply certain blockchain technology forms in order to achieve those sort of targets. And it's a consortium approach, being Amazon. You're a big player, obviously, in this space. And I've lived and breathed that world. I'm ex-Microsoft in this world, and I've come through that, but I've also come through with Cisco and Visa, and I've seen all those elements. And they're starting to become much more agile in terms of how they approach this. But ultimately, consumers will determine how quickly things will move. The sooner we can educate and be educated, and I'm learning every day, as much as I am here talking around this space, I'm also learning. Like I said, we're at the tip of an unknown iceberg. That's where we are in terms of the knowledge aspect of this, because it's being created as we speak. But we should be aligned to those areas you're referring to.
Sorry.
So I got a specific question, but before I go with the question, I would like to basically touch base on what you just said. Because for the last 15 years, I've been involved in sustainability in fashion. And I see similar problem here with Metaverse, which is a lot of sustainability activists are going to be criticizing the Metaverse, but not really providing too much of a solution. And that's exactly what's happening in fashion industry, and kind of like I build business on it, by providing commercial sustainability solutions to brands and retailers. We are in Irish Pavilion, so one of our companies is servicing take-back program for Primark in the UK, Ireland, Germany, and Austria. So it's about incentivizing sustainable behavior by providing people with different incentives to give back the old clothes rather than giving it away. But I think one of the problems I really see with, that's my problem. Like I always say, and I'm talking on different sustainability conferences all the time, that I don't believe in sustainability. I think sustainability is just a trendy word. I believe in commercial sustainability solutions. And in a sense, I think that if we like it or not, people will be buying clothes and changing them all the time, and it's about the industry to play a catch-up and provide the sustainable options for them. And if we like it or not, Metaverse will grow. And all the kids will be playing the games, and they will be just spending all the time online. So it's about providing the sustainability, some kind of a systematic solutions by incentivizing, by changing the legislation, where we can actually influence the behavior. So it's a little bit like, I am within a sustainability crowd, but I'm at the same time, I know what the CEOs of the big companies are saying, and they are, you're talking about common goal. It is and it isn't, because for majority of the businesses, it's still the profit which drives their behavior at the end of the day. And within people within the organizations, it's not maybe the profit, but the next promotion. So people have actually very different reasons why they do things, rather than even what they say. We recently developed a digital wardrobe solution where we automatically digitalize the items which are coming from retailers' checkout to the digital wardrobe. And what scares me is that the Gen Z, we did the focus groups, and they told us, we don't care about the sustainability, we don't give a shit actually. All we care, we say we do, because it's the right thing to do. So if you got this kind of a data, it's scary, because it means whatever survey you're going to do, all the outcomes are going to be bad and faulty, because the input of the information you're getting is faulty. But that's just to basically give the context to that. But my question is, how do you see the fashion? Because like I've listened to Mark Zuckerberg's like 1 hour, 30-minute introduction to Meta, and 9 minutes, the minute number 9, like very early in the stage, he was talking about digital wardrobes and fashion in Metaverse. How do you see this being developed? Where do you think it will go, and what is your opinion about the aspect of a circular fashion, but also the meta fashion in all the space which you're seeing being developed at the moment?
Yeah, look, brilliant question. There's a couple of things I want to sort of tail back on, which you were saying around even the young generation. I mean, concepts around time of use, playing, or being engaged in the metaverse can be linked potentially to how much energy you're using, for example, and having an alert status that comes up and maybe restricts time of use and time of play. You know, if I'm a teenager right now, I don't really know how much am I generating by spending 6, 7, 8 hours playing these games. So if they knew and they realised, oh, hang on, I'm on a red status now, I'm not allowed to play further than this because I'm going to exceed my limit, for example, in terms of how much there's linkages there, you can come up with the solutions there. Go back to the innovation DNA, there are ways to do that. And then that becomes much more sustainable. But in terms of fashion, I have friends of mine who actually created a platform, digital fashion platform, 18 months ago. And it's really interesting, it's this high render 3D fashion for avatars, whatever that may be, whichever world you want to use it for. But the rendering was done by developers who've come across from the traditional world, which were the ones that were building these games for Fortnite and others. But you know, their income was capped. They weren't incentivized to go and design something more high rendered and much more out there. They came on this platform and they started to do more of this, and the marketplace became much more incentivized for them to contribute higher render, higher scoped digital fashion, which had a higher value. And yes, there were higher value in terms of as a crypto payment, so whether it was on Ethereum or others, but it had a higher value. And so they were incentivized to keep doing this, and that's what's going on there. So in terms of where fashion is going to play a role and where it's going to go, mainstream fashion, I mean, we're already seeing, I can't recall whether it was, I can't recall the brand. They're already now setting up digital fashion stores in these metaverses, whether it's Decentraland or even now Sandbox, but others. So they want representation there. You will, yes, technically spend time shopping there to understand and have an asset there. But really, the digital form of that will be for your avatar, because you want to have that presence in whichever world you want to traverse in, right? The linkage, I think, is, do you want to have that presence only because you currently have that presence in the physical world? Or is it because the future consumer expects it, which is this young generation? And is there a link to the physical world with these high rendered?
So that's actually my question, the follow-up question which I wanted to ask you, because when you mentioned the 31 year in the office sitting and working somewhere and how we engage her in the metaverse. So my idea for that is that if we automate the physical clothes into the digital wardrobe with the typical pictures, pretty much the old school way, but still things being on your phone, it's a natural step to add digital items into the digital wardrobe which you're having, which content is being a physical item, but on top of that you could have a wardrobe, a separate wardrobe which would have a digital items. So how do you see, because I think that the crucial part will be for Metaverse to go there is to build the bridge between physical and meta, if you know what I mean. And how do you see that being possible? Because that's kind of like how I see that. Obviously within digital wardrobe we can do tokenization, we can do different incentives on different tokens, fashion tokens for influencers and stuff. But taking it to the meta, which is the next step, how do you see that, and if you see that progression being accurate, or do you have other opinion?
Look, it would be, as a brand, you'd want to have some presence as a brand. So, certainly, how much you need and how many of those, NFTs you're actually making available, scarcity model, always still, like, it's the same concept of Louis Vuitton and luxury cars, right? So, scarcity will add a higher premium. But people do want it, they want that in this world. So, we're seeing online gaming in the casino world where people want to dress up with the high fashion, 3D glasses and be sitting at these poker tables because it's presence, right? It's that kind of, and that's happening. These NFT drops are happening. So you probably have to have that representation in some way. The consumer will look for it. I mean, recently, Steve Colbert, I'm not sure if anyone watches Steve Colbert, the comedian in the US, Steve Colbert, the Colbert Report. He wrote on a paper bag his definition of what an NFT was. And he just, they took a photo of it and they tokenized it and it sold for $30,000 at auction on the Jim's marketplace. And in an NFT marketplace, Terry Virtue actually went and said, well, let's create, and he donated those proceedings to build up a school, for example. Let's go and meet 10,000 avatars of Steve Colbert carrying this thing, 3D version of him with his own fashion, whatever he had, and sell it at $10 each, or starting prices of $10 each. Well, the number of the avatar had a value. So the first one that was minted sold for 10,000. The others that had unique numbers, like 100 or double-digit numbers, sold in the hundreds or whatever. So how much you release is the same can apply to fashion. I've got unique number 777, right? And so therefore that's unique. It has a value to someone out there for some reason. But it's true, it does have a value. And that's where I think the opportunity lies in that world. And then, is it going to be utilised? Like I said, I'm going to go and attend an online event. It could be a concert, and I want to dress up for that. Last week we had a James Bond themed event at the Capital Club. I went and bought a physical tuxedo. I didn't buy it, actually, rented it. And so I was really just a tuxedo there, and it's, that's a physical experience because I was physically there. A lot of people saying, geez, you're looking like James Bond there. Well, maybe I'll create, I said to him, actually, that's probably my avatar. But, in a real way, there's a linkage you can have. I could have had the event also online. Maybe next year's one could be a Capital Club Metaverse hosting of it, so that those who want to attend virtually. And then I'll buy that.
So I actually see the fashion industry being one of the major industries that will be disrupted. I think it will slow fast fashion, which is obviously fantastic for us in the sustainability field. I think people will move more to having digital clothing than their physical clothing because they've only got a certain amount of capped expense. So it will move a lot of that fast fashion away from physical into the digital world, especially for your younger generation. So I think it will have a major impact, especially in the fashion industry.
Definitely, I agree. How about sort of addressed a way forward for you?
I think it does, and I think, I'm also interested like how much of the meta players will get into the physical community. So let's say we're going to have 1 million users using our tool, how much we have to come up with things, or how much people who are in this space will realize that the community which we are having has a certain value for them, for the tokens which they're doing, and all the other things. So I think it will be merger of this world together.
Definitely, yeah, agree.
I have a question from online, from Adrian.
Yeah.
Really wanted to be here, but unfortunately, like the current status of many things. So this is a long question. I'm trying to find how we. She says, I am all for technological advantages, and now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, but how can we prevent others from being left behind? That's the first part of the question. Global humanitarian in 2022, UN Humanitarian Affairs warned that 245 million people could be in need of humanitarian assistance for the next year, while the world is battling the worst hunger crisis in a century. They are not talking about Metaverse or NFTs. They need food and clean water. Any ideas on how we can help with this?
Yeah, there's a new concept coming out called Play to Give in the Metaverse, which is the concept of dropping an NFT, which then goes and funds NGO projects, such as UN projects and others. So there's a way of doing that. So you can link the connectivity of me wanting to give, if I'm high net worth or if I'm carrying an asset, a digital asset, and I can drop that. So this is going to go towards feeding refugees in a place who knows maybe in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East or somewhere, and then you can link it. And so you add value. So there is value there.
So how is that different, for instance, from me going to a place and dropping?
Because it's peer-to-peer. It's a peer-to-peer. And I think that's the reality right now. So what this does, what the Metaverse does, it becomes more peer-to-peer, right? So I know who the giver is, and I'm giving directly versus intermediary. That's really what decentralization is about. So
just to give some context to that, if you look at charity organizations around the world, we have, obviously don't want to name any specifics, but you're looking at for every $100 that's donated, on average we're ending up with $10 actually getting, and that's a really good result, actually getting to the people that actually need that money because of the infrastructure, the logistics, and all of the banking institutions that are involved. So if we can provide that sort of direct service where you actually know who the money is going to, that indulges people to actually be able to donate fully to those organizations.
Actually, it's amazing you mentioned, because I was thinking charity after what you just said, and we're now in the UK. I'm working with the charity sector as well, and this is actually 19%. So if they sell something for £10, it's actually £1.90 only going to the causes, which is bad, yes. So within our digital world, we've created this peer-to-peer system that if you want to buy something, you buy it from me, I send it to you, but the money goes to charity. And in that system, we can actually do 95% going to good causes. But that's kind of our innovation. But I'm thinking, in terms of charity raising, for the charities, rather than asking for money, hey, can I have money because I need for something, they can do NFTs, where people can buy stuff, and then the whole amount of money goes to charity. It's an amazing opportunity for the charity sector to actually incentivize almost like to generate additional revenue from the places where they do not have anything. The only problem I'm seeing is that most of the people I'm speaking to from the charity sector, they are like 1980s, to say the least.
I mean, if I was out there, then certainly, being in those environments where you don't have a home, you're a refugee, you need access to food and water first and foremost. You could also argue that the access to food and water is fast-tracked through connectivity. So you need some kind of, and if you have that connectivity, so some form of mobile connectivity, that's where I'd be fast-tracking. I mean, all these refugees are spread around. I'd be making sure that they're able to have connectivity with a mobile, and then through that becomes your gateway to having some form of access
And direct funding.
And direct funding, right? And so, and then from there, whether it's someone gifting me an NFT drop with a value, a fiat exit in order toward the currency exit that allows me to do that, then I would go for that every day of the week. But it has to be a concerted effort. So, obviously, telcos and government and UN, it needs to be an intertwined way to make sure that we're not just going in there and providing food and water and then hoping for the best. We're also giving them an opportunity to have that accessibility, because it's hard not to have that.
I love how you look at me like I'm, please stop it. Anyway, yeah, no, I lost momentum.
We didn't lose you, did we?
Laura? Like, one common thing that I keep finding is Metaverse seems to be another place where the individual is a slave of like this huge system that's either a Microsoft or some kind of NFT or some kind of coin or something that creates a lot of wealth in a big corporation that might not exist yet, but someone else makes more money than I do. How do we avoid this slave we need more people because we need them all to be sitting there and typing away so that I can create the 90% of the wealth coming.
I think there's a component of that, that we kind of have to accept that there is that component. There are going to be large companies and large institutions that are going to make money out of this. It's where we need to concentrate on. That's sort of where we're covering is education and getting people to be more educated on what the metaverse actually means and how they can be involved in it. But yes, we do have to accept that there is a certain percentage of it that will be large companies producing large products for consumers.
And don't you ever find we have this amazing world just outside our windows, right? Like we have the beautiful desert here, you come from Australia, I believe, South Africa, Denmark, so many different places. We have amazing worlds and we keep making these digital representations that we then put on VR goggles and sit and look at.
Yeah.
What is this?
So I, 4 years ago, when I was at Visa, we actually came up with this concept, which is, it takes me 14 hours to fly to Sydney. And most of the time I've already seen all those movies probably 5 times over, right? So halfway through the flight, I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do when I get there. I'll use Sydney as an example because, well, what if, and we did this, we created an immersive experience in a city verse where you could navigate through the city, digitally see what's going on and all the key landmarks and just book them before you arrive. So rather than wasting 14 hours on the flight doing nothing and watching, I could actually then traverse the city because I'm not familiar with that city. I am from Sydney, but maybe someone isn't. And then be productive, organise their schedule physically in that plane, and then use it to their benefit. But that's an example of an application way of sort of getting more efficient in the physical world. Because when I get there, I don't want to be lining up for 2 hours like you do. I think if you go into Rome right now, you're probably going to line up for an hour and a half when you go to see the Vatican, right? And the same will apply now with the world starting to travel in these locally or globally. So I want efficiency, but you got to think where could it apply, where could it help? And so yeah, so that's where I look at it.
So you're fine with, for instance, living in a world where whatever you can find online, we did this for Etihad Airways, just to give you an example, and we actually showcased it at the Euromania conference in Barcelona at the time. And it was done here. And the reason why it was done here was it was born out of a concept and discussion that we had as a group. And these are the kind of things that come out, right? It's solving someone's problem. When we're looking at it from solving someone's problem, and you know what tools you have at your disposal, you can then come and be creative, but not ignoring the fact I actually physically want to go and see the Opera House. I physically want to climb the Harbour Bridge. I want to do all those things, but I want to do them in a way which is efficient. And having that immersive experience which allows me to navigate and say, well, you know what, there's too much of a queuing system for this, I don't want to go there. But I'd love to go to this hotspot here, which I didn't realise existed. So I actually wanted you to say this. So one of my fears is that we're creating this parallel digital world where we all go in, we test it out. Yeah, it's great. I bought these fancy VR goggles so I can feel it, I might even smell it, this and that. And then we go and we want to see the real stuff. Why do we need that layer on top?
The generational impact that's happening, right?
But is it like, should we not ask, why do we need that on top?
We should.
If it costs that much, like resources and energy and just overall, like putting people in like an electrical box where they sit and,
Depends. Some people will choose to catch a train, other people will choose to catch a spaceship. It's a choice, right? So I think what's going to happen is ultimately the choice is based on human sort of experiences. We've gone through a pandemic, I think, which nobody expected, and we've lived that sort of world. We also got zoomed out and thought, grab a Zoom. So now we're like, no, we want to get back to the physical world and meet and greet and go to these physical things, and that's always going to happen. But the pace of change is not going to go away. It's just the reality of humanity. And if you go back to history to where we are now, I think you could offer the ultimate experience. I guess maybe that's the price of us being humans, that we just thrive for change and we thrive for growth. But now we're much more knowledgeable about that impact that that's having. And I think knowing that we actually have metrics around the impact that's having, now we can actually navigate into a different way. So, yeah.
Good. Any other questions from anybody?
Just a couple of observations here. My first trip to Dubai, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the Expo, I didn't really know about it, honestly. I think if sustainability and kind of see the world that you don't know about are pillars of the metaverse, I think that's great. At least 2 legs of that 4-legged table that we want to do.
Totally agree. In fact, I'm not sure if anyone's had a chance to go on the virtual Expo site, but it would have been great if that was a metaverse, just to have people around the world experience it in a way that we're experiencing it physically. So, but again, that's the kind of thing where, you know, probably the next one will have that, I would imagine, or at least offer a way for people to participate. But yeah, totally agree.
But you can't taste the food.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think for me, my hope for the metaverse is that it does become a tool for change and does help us develop society and give people access to education and to literacy so that those environments can actually evolve and keep up with the pace of what we're going at the moment in the sort of westernized society. So that's my hope for the metaverse, but like with anything else in sustainability, it's sort of up to us to make those changes and to be activists in promoting those type of changes that are happening.
Totally agree. I mean, passing thought for me, or departure thought is expect change, embrace change relative to the environment that you want to live in, right? And we will determine that over time. Always think of yourselves as, you know, driving innovation and having a deep innovation DNA in whatever we do. And I think the metaverse is a tool to help us strive and become more innovative. I think that's clear. And then, you know, I use this word of entrepreneurship, but think like an entrepreneur in terms of constantly wanting to learn, constantly wanting to partner, innovate, you know, and think in that way, because that then gives you a way to continually evolve and drive things forward. And I think the metaverse is going to be that platform that allows us to then do the traversing through multiple different experiences, learning experiences, visual experiences in everything that we can imagine. But yeah, it's really going to be something quite exciting, and it's not going to go away. It may come up with a different name, but at the end of the day, it's going to be there.
Just in terms of like online security, cyber security, do you foresee it as something that's going to be quite difficult to police, or something that's actually easier to police than, say, Web 2.0?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it goes back to enactment of law and order and regulation, you know, and how you can bring that together. Yes, there are going to be those bad actors. Yes, there's going to be, you know, hackers out there that are going to try and potentially take your identity, right? And to drive that, we're seeing that already in Web 2.0. That's not going to change. I think the understanding is who's accountable for the jurisdictional implementation if I am compromised, you know, and is that far-reaching hand to grab that individual or entity in place, and that's where, you know, the sooner you can get the industry and government on the policy bandwagon together, locally, regionally, and globally, the faster that you'll be able to put mechanisms in place. We have the tools when it comes to cybersecurity, but we need to have the processes behind that. And I do advise one cybersecurity firm today, but that's, you know, there are tools, but there are processes, and then there is regulation and policy. And we've started that, like I said, in the last couple of months. We've already gone straight into this because we're seeing that cybersecurity, you know, critical infrastructure, and protecting that critical infrastructure for industry as much as for the individual and their own personal information needs to be at hand. we've got a cyber law that's released here in the UAE recently, which has now entailed more meat around, protection of consumer data, but also the young generation's data. If I think of the young generation playing these metaverse games, and they're engaged in teams, and those teams are going and attacking other avatars and whatever else, it's natural for them to think that's normal, right? But they also don't know what they're giving up, and who may be, taking some of their credentials. So we have to have that motion in place. And, but that's a big element, and that's why you're seeing, today, I think this week is DrySec Week, the Gulf Information Security Conference that's going on. And there's a lot of discussion around this, because they all realise that there's got to be an angle. The tools are there, processes need to be behind it, policy regulation needs to shape it and be at the forefront.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thanks very much. Here's a metaverse right there. That's the immersive learning metaverse, disruptive focus, by the way. That's still up. So, all right.
Very good.
Hope you guys enjoyed that. Was it informative?
Very good, thank you.
Cool. I need some oxygen, real physical water.